mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice cold. I'm only here to even the score. Whoa. My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice cold. We're down right now, but did it before. Whoa. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is on up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is on up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Knighted Ones podcast, episode number 47. That's 47. Pretty soon I'm going to be running out of fingers. We are the only podcast that features a former UCF National Champion, a former UCF radio host, an ESPN analyst and hoops player, an infamous rapper, our resident influencer, and IG star shooting the breeze talking UCF sports. And remember to like and follow us on YouTube, IG, X, all of the tings, and check out the 70 plus teams and conferences on the College Huddle, of which we are a member. In addition to that, we will also, Alan and I, and maybe Trey, will be on another show as guests on Why We Huddle, and we'll be sitting there with and chatting with a Florida Gators podcaster. So it might be a little spicy. I don't know how that's going to work out, but obviously we have a game coming up. So that is being recorded tomorrow. So we'll drop that at some point this week. So look out for that. In addition, this week, we're going to be talking a little bit more recruiting. We've got another 2025 commit to our class, another 4-star. So excited about that. Big 12 Media Days. There was a lot of chatter there. The guys looked fresh and clean. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The EA college football game. So NCAA 2024 finally dropped. So excited about that. We'll talk a little bit of football news. You know, there's been a lot of conversations about expansion again. We've been talking a little bit about the ACC, the Big 12, what the future of the ACC is. You've heard us mention the Power 3 conferences. That was for a reason. And there's a little bit more talking that's come out of that. We'll have a little Would You Rather and a little bit of the court updates that might be affecting, UCF and its student athletes and their status as student athletes. So we'll talk a little bit about that, the implications of that. And last but not least, first round home playoff game criteria. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring back to the show Nobrah, who is not having technical difficulties this week. Nobrah.
Hey now.
Hey now. Did I do a good job last week with the hey now? I thought I did pretty good.
Oh, yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, did you enjoy the hair flip or attempt at hair flip? Even the Utah man got into it with us.
Yeah, it was all great.
Yeah, it was a little stiff. It was a little stiff. Josh got a little bobblehead action going on. I don't know. It just wasn't
there.
Right. Yeah, the spirit was definitely there. We were channeling our inner Nobrah. Let me go ahead and bring to the stage Alan Levin. Alan, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
Hey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot of hair flipping. You need to do the hair flip. Come on. That's with the hat on. You got to take the hat off.
It's still flipping. Look. There we go.
Oh my gosh.
I may be getting a cut soon. I don't know. I'm considering.
What does that mean? Like all the way cut or just a little bit cut? Are you taking like a half an inch off or what?
No, a good amount. It'd be noticeable, basically.
All right, so we've got the Good Hands new hair debut next week. Is that what I'm hearing?
We'll see.
All right, so make sure you tune in for that to see Alan's his new hair. Unfortunately, we don't have the rest of the guys this week. However, some of them may be joining us for the show that we mentioned earlier to gang up on the Gator host a little bit and talk a little UCF. But for this week, you've got Alan and I and Nobrah. As long as he wants to stick around, he usually goes and hides in the corner. But he's look at that. He just disappeared. Okay. All right, fine. But we'll talk a little bit about UCF football. So Alan, why don't you get us kicked off with some exciting recruiting news?
Another great week in recruiting. This, obviously last week we brought in 7 new recruits to the 25 class. Well, this week we added another 4-star offensive tackle, Chaston Brown. This was a huge pickup. This is the Knights' 4th record in the Gus Malzahn era, record 4th offensive lineman part of the class. So he is going very, hard up front. Making sure that he fortifies the offensive line. And it's a big one. Yeah, I knew that was fair. But, look, the big uglies, I guess I should have said. But
the big uglies up front, right?
The big uglies up front, right? Speaking of big, this may be another B, but he's 6'7", 260 pounds. A little light, actually, but he is very tall. He comes out of Warner Robins, Georgia. Actually, he plays for the Northside High, and they are in the same division as Thomas County Central, which is historically one of the best high school programs in Georgia. Unfortunately, Northside's been a little down recently. I've been looking at their records. They were 4-7 last year. Haven't really been great in the last few years, but he's in the same division as Thomas County Central, where our highest rated recruit, Kendarius Reddick, plays high school ball. So that's our 4th guy from the Peach State. And our 2nd highest rated commit overall, right after Reddick, and obviously our highest rated offensive player. And I actually looked this up. Brown is the highest rated offensive line recruit we have had in UCF history. So that is something of note to be, something we want to talk about, something that's really cool. UCF historically has kind of found diamonds in the rough on offensive line. A lot of our flashy 4-stars, especially in the Gus Malzahn era, have been, skill players or DBs. There hasn't really been that much flash when it comes to offensive line. So I think this was a really big pickup. We obviously are relying on a lot of transfers right now for the offensive line, in the portal. So it's really good that he's fortifying that offensive line with high school players. So if you're counting at home, that, at least according to Rivals, that would be our 8th 4-star prospect. If you're looking at 247,
so hold on. You're saying not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not
I'm going
5,
full LeBron James on this
6,
one.
Not 7, not 8,
Not
with
8.
a better hairline.
Exactly. Well, LeBron's hair magically reappeared somehow. I wonder how.
It got transplanted from another part of his body.
100%. But yeah, Brown is so highest rated offensive line recruit in UCF history. Nationally, he is extremely relevant. He's actually a top 200 recruit in the entire nation. He's rated top 30 in the entire state of Georgia, which, as we all know, is a great football state. And he's rated number 20 at his position, which is offensive tackle specifically. So this was a really, really big pickup. With his commitment, we are now the number 17 class in the nation. So if we can keep this class together, we have, quite a few blue chip recruits. We are challenging last year's class, and if things keep going in the direction they're going, this will definitely beat last year's class as far as the highest rated class in UCF history, the most blue chip recruits. And I think there's, great variety in those blue chips. They're both on defense and offense. And now, we have 2 recruits that are, at the highest we ever got at their specific positions. But I think offensive line, I like what he's doing here, Malzahn, that is, and getting some guys from the high school ranks. If you look at the last few classes, at most, there's been 2 offensive linemen, a lot of times just 1. And he's really been bringing in transfers every single year, which is causing, every year to kind of have to just throw together on offensive linemen and hope, and hope they gel, which we saw in some of UCF's great teams that a lot of those offensive line had been together 3, 4, 5 years. So I like that he is, going after offensive linemen. And now we have 4 with now a blue chip recruit in the mix.
Yeah. So, 6'7", 260, that 260 kind of jumps out at people for a lineman, right? So I think there's a little bit more to kind of peek behind the curtain and kind of explain why that is, right? So he he had, some good offers, but with a 4-star and being who he is and where he's ranked nationally, not the offers that we've been seeing lately, right? So you did have Louisville, you had Pitt, you had West Virginia, whatever, but you haven't had the big names that we've been seeing lately, Georgia, Alabama, etc. So part of the reason for that is he has only played college football 1 year, right? He's a basketball player, which means he's light on his feet and also light in his frame. And, if this guy was closer to 300 pounds, I'm not sure that he wouldn't be a 5-star, right? So, considering the camps that he's gone to, and that he's ranked the number 36 player in Georgia and number 263 nationally with 1 year of experience and light on his frame, I think that speaks to how good of an athlete he can and will become. The other part about this is he also expects, this is a 4-star player, that gives us a little bit of an advantage because he knows where he's at and he's got a lot to learn, and that he's got to add some heft to his frame. So he's not going to be one of those guys that if he doesn't play snaps and starts year one, his freshman year, that he's going to be looking to transfer. So the expectation is, and he even said this himself, it's going to take him a bit to get on the line. And it'll take him a bit to get the frame that he needs to be able to be on the line at a school like UCF. But there's obviously a lot of upside in having, being ranked that high nationally, given his frame and his experience. I think that says a lot about who this recruit is. Now, 8 4-stars. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we, if we got 1 4-star, we were jumping through the roof, but now we've got 8 and there's more on the horizon, right? So we're not done yet. You heard me say to grab your Snuggies the other day before we exploded for those 7 recruits in a week. So make sure that you can kind of let go of those Snuggies, but kick back, have a bourbon or your drink of choice, Kool-Aid, whatever it is, and relax a little bit because there's more on the way. So exciting news. I mean, number 17 class in the country at UCF. It wasn't too long ago that I didn't think that we would ever say that. And I can't say how big of a jump that is as a UCF fan versus where we were before. And it seems like every week we're saying it again and again and again. So recruiting just completely out the stratosphere.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, Roger, that it was his first year of ever playing varsity football. And in his first year, he was named the 6A division offensive lineman of the year in his first ever year playing. So beat out a lot of other players in a strong division. Like I mentioned, that has Thomas County, and was ranked as basically, won the top offensive lineman award. And that's really impressive when you consider it was his first year ever playing football at a high level. And, not only that, I was reading, he started out the year actually even lighter at around like 240 pounds. So he did add about 20 pounds to his frame in the last, whatever that is, 6 months or so. So I think, he's only going to, probably add more weight as he gets into a college, weight room and whatnot. But, the fact that he played basketball, he's obviously athletic. He's obviously quick, quick on his feet, a guy that's probably a lot more athletic than the average left tackle, which is what he plays in high school right now. So I think, he's a guy that, like you said, may be under recruited because of that, but teams are probably seeing his talent and he could really offer, be one of the best return on investments in the cycle because maybe he did get a little bit under recruited due to his weight and due to the fact that he's relatively inexperienced.
Yeah, George O'Leary used to say that the football games are won in the trenches, and the closer you are to the ball, the more important your position, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a tackle, offensive tackle, he's going to be really, really close to the ball. He can put 20 to 25 more pounds on once he gets to campus easily within a season. A lot of times people will bulk over the summer and then come in and lose some of it as they play. because they're not able to be in the weight room as much because they're game planning and traveling and doing all the things that they need to do to be successful during the football season. But I would not be surprised if we don't look at this kid in the late spring of next year and see that he's 285. So I could see that very easily happening. And once you start getting into the 300s, you're pretty ready to compete, right? So I could see him being a 300-pounder by this time next season. Now, that's a lot, right? That's a lot, but he's obviously got a lot of frame to put it on, and they're going to make sure he eats right, and he's going to be a gym rat because he knows he's not going to be playing right away, and he's going to want to get there. So very excited about this kid. If he's 6'7", 260, and he's doing that well, he's not just outsizing people. He's got some talent. He's also got to have good hands and good feet, which is extremely important as a lineman. In high school, you typically have these guys that are so big that they're just out muscling or out gaining the high school competition, and they gain their 4 stars. This guy's got some talent. He's got athleticism. He's obviously got coordination, and in the line and on the line, it's all about how quick your feet are, what your hand placement, and what the technique is. So he's going to have some time to learn all of that, and I think he's going to be really, really good for us. Yeah,
I agree with all that. And, like you said, he'll put on some weight, and, it's exciting what this class is, how it's finalizing out.
You sound super excited.
I am excited about this class.
This is Alan's excited voice. I
am really excited about this class. It is just so cool. It really is to see, like you said. I mean, I know we've said this a million times, but if we got one 4-star recruit, we're excited. Heck, if we got a high 3-star recruit, a guy that was on the border of being a 4-star, we're really excited. And it's funny how I think of 3-star recruits now. I remember thinking in 2016, 2017, I would talk up these 3-star recruits we get. And now it's like looking at it, I'm like, oh, it's a 3-star. Why wasn't he a 4-star? It's just funny how the kind of perspective changes. But I mean, it's hard to, it would have been so almost next to impossible to envision this 4 years ago, whatever, that we would have 8 blue chip recruits in a single class. I mean, it is such a cool time to be a UCF fan. I've been saying this for a long time, but what we get to experience in real time as UCF fans, I think is more unique than any other fan of any other school. I mean, these schools that have been around for hundreds of years or playing football for a century, people that are fans of them today didn't get to see any of their firsts. And we're seeing the first of everything, the first time we were nationally ranked, the first time we got a 4-chip, a 4-star recruit, the first time we won a major bowl, the first time we were in the top 10, and we were getting to see all this in real time. And this just adds another element, another part of the story where we're seeing the first time that we are having a top 30 class for that, but now obviously top 20, first time ever getting to see that. So I think it's really cool if you're a UCF fan, all these firsts that you continue to see year after year after year. And it's, going to continue like that. And it's really cool.
Yeah, it really is. And the funny thing you talk about first, it's enjoy it now, because the fans that are being born now, right. They weren't there for beating Georgia, in the Liberty Bowl. They weren't there for the Fiesta Bowl. They weren't there for all of those great firsts that we had. So the crazy thing is we're kind of in this position where you get to see a lot of the firsts, and that generation's already passed by. So enjoy the ride, enjoy the football, enjoy the experience, make sure you're loud, make sure you're on your feet. And because this is really once in a lifetime for a fan base, and once in a generation in a fan base. All right. First natty champ, by the way. I know you don't believe that, but
I believe that I will see that one day before I'm dead. So I am excited to be able to say that one day.
All right. Let's talk about Big 12 Media Day highlights a little bit. Obviously we had Gus Malzahn went, obviously. You had KJ there, RJ was there, Kobe Hudson was there,
And Lee Hunter.
Yeah, a big Lee Hunter, and I loved seeing him all dressed to the nines and talking to the media. He kind of reinforced, I think, what everybody was saying. Like his description was them being a young team, and that he expects them to do a lot better this year. Alan, what were your takeaways?
My takeaways from Media Day, I think, you get a lot of coach speak at Media Day. I mean, I've personally attended multiple Media Days when I was, when I was a journalism major at UCF. They're cool. You get a lot of this, especially for I don't even know what do you call it, a super coach, speaky coach like Gus Malzahn, who really literally has said the same recycled quotes for 4 years of being here. You get a lot of that. And, the players are, I think, a little bit more animated, which is nice. But my takeaways, I think, one, when it comes to Gus Malzahn, he is really going in and reinforcing how much he says this is the year. This is the year that UCF should and will compete for the conference championship. He's never said even in the American, never said, hey, like, we're geared up. We're built. This team is built to win the conference. I mean, he's obviously said things that, shown he's confident and that he expects to win, but he's never really said like that. And he keeps talking about how important this year is for the program as a whole to, basically said that 6 and 7 was not acceptable, that he hasn't gone under 500, I think, ever as a head coach until last year. And that, this is important for a lot of reasons. The main one being, if we can win the conference or be in that conversation, he thinks the program is just going to take off, that the recruiting momentum we already have will reach another level because of the fact that if we win, we would obviously make the playoffs, and all that unprecedented exposure we would gather from that. So it's interesting to see how much he's going all into those comments. He's not backing away from the fact that UCF is built this year for competing. On top of that, I mean, you got a lot of the same quotes. KJ is the most Cam Newton-like quarterback I've had since Cam Newton. We've heard that 6 million times, that he's a dual threat guy. We've heard
not just from him, but from the media too.
Correct. From the media, we hear, the same thing about Lee Hunter. He's a guy that's matured. He's taken a step forward. He has a chance to be one of the best defensive linemen in the league. We've heard the same thing about Kobe. I mean, he talked about a lot of the players. We talked about mainly the guys that were with him at Media Day. Kobe Hudson, he's really stepped up to be a leader on this team. He's our best receiver. He's a vertical threat, all that. And RJ saying the same thing about him, that he really is. He's one of the best running backs he's ever coached. He used to be a quarterback. Now he's a running back. He still has room to learn. So he said the same things over and over. So I didn't get too many takeaways from him, but I did, from the players, it really did feel like they expected to win. They were upset about how last year ended. They felt they left a lot of points on the table. They felt they left a lot of wins on the table, which we know obviously happened. And I think that they talked about, that RJ Harvey specifically had a quote, "This is the best UCF team I've been a part of since I've been here since 2020. And Kobe Hudson says, something along the lines like, we have the potential to do anything we want this year. We have the offense. He thinks the defense looks really good too, being able to watch those guys being on the other side of the ball. So, I mean, my key takeaway was really that this whole team is confident, as they should be, and as we'd hope we'd want them to be. And then the only other thing was, it was interesting. I thought Gus Malzahn, we kind of knew this, but when you hear it, the sheer number, it's crazy to hear. He mentioned how that they have 40 new players on the team, which I would assume transfer portal, that would be an outrageous number. Even if you had a lot of graduates and whatnot, that would be pretty crazy. And that number is like almost half of the team essentially is new. And I think he also mentioned
40 out of 85 scholarship players.
Correct. So you're looking at, whatever that is, 45, 46%. And, but he did mention, I think he got a question when he mentioned that about the chemistry. How does that affect the chemistry? How does that affect the team when you have all these new, not only just players, but veterans that maybe were leaders on their last team, and now they're coming to a situation where there's already established leaders? And he mentioned, Gus did, that, they've done a great job bonding. And I think the most special UCF teams we've seen, 13, 17, 18, they all mentioned how they had that chemistry, that bonding. Trey talks about it. Rashad Kazi, who's my neighbor, talks about it. A lot of these guys talk about that bond they had and how just united and together they were. And you're starting to hear that a lot from these from this team. So I think, that was my key takeaway, was the fact that, they're all confident. They all feel like they're bonding, and they all feel like they have the pieces in place. They just got to go get it done on the field.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing, I agree with you on the player side of things. I also think that on the coach side, you heard me say this before, Gus Malzahn's pissed off. And there were other national talking heads that were talking about, his demeanor, like the fact that he was super chill. He wasn't stressed out. He made some comments at the media events about not having to deal with that it's a different dynamic because he's not having to deal with the boosters as much. And, quite frankly, that he's pissed off. And if other people were getting that vibe, we got that vibe here. He'd mentioned it a few times. This was his first season where he didn't end up with a winning season. And because of that, or first season that he ended up with a losing season, let's put it that way. You have a combination of a coach that's mad, a guy who's a prototypical quarterback for his type of system. Whether he picks it up and operates it properly right away, that's a whole nother question altogether. But he's done that. He's remade the defense. This team is built to win. And that's why, we kept talking about this dark horse stuff and all of that other stuff. That's where that was coming from. As far as the players were concerned, another player that he mentioned was Ladarius Tennyson. And the Ladarius Tennyson is someone who did not make the trip. However, it looks like he's going to be playing safety. He was playing nickel in the offseason, but he looks like he's going to be playing safety for us. And he's known as a hard-hitting, smash-mouth football player and really, really good on special teams. And he went out of his way, even though he wasn't there, to speak about the difference that Ladarius Tennyson brings to the defense. So it feels like, and the way he was kind of describing it in some of his comments, was this is the glue guy, the leader, the experienced guy. He's got 1 year left. He was at Auburn when Gus was there. He went and he played there, started at linebacker there, then went to Ole Miss, played linebacker there his first year. He got into 8 games. The next year he was a starter, and now he's come to us, come back home, and he seems to be a difference maker. The other person we didn't talk about, and that was my fault, was talking about Deshaun Pace, who also made the trip. And one of the things that Deshaun Pace was talking about was the Cincinnati game and how, people were asking him about that Cincinnati game and how it's going to feel when he's playing his former team. And he said he's not mad about it, but he's definitely got the game circled. So I feel like, there's been this back and forth about who the rivals are for UCF in the league. And Cincinnati, we played some meaningful games against them. Deshaun Pace lost against us, last year. And there's definitely some bad blood with some of those Cincinnati players, and I expect them to take that out on the field when we play them. So I'm excited about that as well. You mentioned here that KJ was miffed at Sanders being called the best QB in the conference. I know there was a picture on social media floating around of his locker and how that was posted on his locker room. So obviously KJ is also pretty motivated to do well and has got that chip on his shoulder. And that's something I feel like UCF has been missing, is that chip on the shoulder. We were at the top of the AAC for a while. There was expectations around the program, but there's nothing like that feeling for a football team to give that extra effort when you are overlooked or when you are not respected in the way that you should be, et-cetera. And I feel like KJ, with the season he had last season, going into this season, he was a Heisman dark horse. The expectation is that he would be in the Heisman race and probably go ahead and go to the NFL. And due to the injuries and the the offensive line. He didn't have the season he wanted. Now he's being overlooked. And when you see all these things coming out about quarterbacks in the league, he's not being looked at as a top quarterback. What do you think this means for KJ and how he plays this season? I think it motivates him. I think that's a good thing for UCF.
Yeah, first of all, I love that he's a little upset about being overlooked. Like, I want my quarterback to be the most confident player on the team. I mean, at the end of the day, we all know it's the most important position in sports. And I mean, look, if you compare it to the quotes from him compared to JRP at the last two media days, I'm sorry, give me KJ's quotes all day. I like that he's saying no. I mean, Shedeur Sanders might be the guy that gets all the press and all the media. And, I'm not taking away any, both myself and I'm sure KJ feels I'm not taking anything away from what Shedeur has been able to, accomplish athletically. At the end of the day, I mean, we're talking about a guy that's the all-time leading passer in Arkansas history at an SEC school. And Shedeur Sanders is coming off a 4-8 year. Not to say that he's not a great quarterback, but I like the confidence from KJ. I think going into the year, he has something to prove. Not only did, last year was arguably one of his worst years as a starter, just overall Arkansas season, and he didn't have the best year compared to some of his previous years. So I think he's coming in a system that is tailor-made for him and a coach that he knows, likes, and trusts that recruited him in the past. With a lot of weapons around him, both on the ground and in the air. And I love the confidence. That's what I want to see out of my quarterback, that is going to come and say, no, I'm going to be the best guy. Even if it means it's irrational confidence, I don't care. Give me that all day. And I think what it means is he's going to come into the season a little angry, like you said, but confident that he can go out there and lead UCF to new heights. And he knows that he's extremely important. And yeah, that's my quarterback. He knows he has a chance for a special season, and he knows that he's got the team around him. And I love the confidence.
Yeah, me too. And I want him to have that chip on his shoulder. He's got an opportunity to go to the NFL, make some big noise, and make a lot of money next year. And I want him to be that person. I want him to have that confidence, and I want him to exude that confidence to the rest of his team, right? So at the end of the day, when you start stacking Big 12 quarterbacks, you see Cam Rising above him. Cam Rising above him, right? You see Sanders, you see the Arizona quarterback. You see Avery Johnson, who barely played for Kansas State in relief last year. And I think he's going to be a great quarterback, having watched him, right? He reminds me a lot of Holton Ahlers in the way that he plays. But at the end of the day, I think KJ's kind of being pushed down the quarterback ladder. And I think that's for a competitive guy who's played at the top of his game in high school, played in the SEC, played really, really well in the SEC. I think he's got a lot to prove this year. And clearly it's bulletin board material, literally in his locker room. And if that's the case, you've got a motivated KJ Jefferson. Look out, Big 12 defenses, because I really think, he's the guy. He's kind of got that KZS feel when you watch him. I don't know if you watched any of his Alabama or Arkansas games, but when he played Alabama, when he played Florida, he's the guy that's going to make sure that he does not go down. He's going to keep fighting. No matter what happens, he doesn't seem phased when he's on the field. If they're down or whatever, he's calm, collected, and he's the guy that makes that extra little slip of the tackle or whatever that make that play happen. And that's who he was at Arkansas, right? That's what made him so special. That's what made them a little successful and making some noise in the SEC for 2 years in a row. But the flip side of that is he did not have this team. Arkansas, I've talked to some big time national recruiting people. I've talked to some national college football writers, and the consensus is the team that he has at UCF is head and shoulders, both from a line perspective, from his skill players perspective, from his receivers perspective. he's got a team, an offensive team that's going to allow him to be KJ Jefferson. And that means that he can do that not in spite of his team, but because of his team. And if you have someone that doesn't have to carry the load every single game, then special things can happen. And that's what I'm expecting out of KJ Jefferson this year. Another thing that was kind of a funny comment and meme that was running around was the Hulk meme of RJ. Now, it seems like every year we talk about how big RJ has gotten, right? So I know last year we were talking about it preseason, like, dude is like Hulk smash to the max. But you look at the pictures of that guy, you know, in his T-shirt. Yes, we're not FSU fans here, right? So we look at our players with the T-shirts on, and the dude is like literally standing there and like almost ripping out of his T-shirt without it. Yes, we are a family-friendly show, folks. So, you know, he just looks like he is physically ready to punish defenses. And I think RJ Harvey, you know, in the few words that he the few words that he has uttered at these press conferences, because he's not a man of many words, he's ready, he's focused, he knows this is his time to shine. He knows Gus will give him the opportunities to do that, to be, you know, an NFL back. And it's funny because one thing I did hear a lot more this time around from the media day highlights was how many times Gus Malzahn said, that's an NFL guy. That's an NFL guy. That's an NFL guy. And if you look at who they are athletically and their performance on the field, those guys are NFL guys. So go ahead.
No, it's true. Well, first of all, I do want to comment on RJ. I mean, that dude got yoked. I mean, he, like you said, I know like every year he's gotten bigger, but oh my God, he looks like, you know, I know he slowed down at the end of last year due to, you know, probably just getting worn out with the amount of carries and the amount of work that he got. But I think
injuries. He had some injuries.
But I think he's physically built himself up to be able to take that punishment. I mean, he's looking like he could just bowl over some defensive linemen or linebackers, obviously DBs. And he also has the advantage of having a great 1B in Penny Boone right behind him, who is going to be able to remove some of the workload from RJ and be just as punishing, just as good. So when you have that 1-2 punch, it's going to benefit everyone. It's going to benefit RJ. And RJ, looks like he's gearing up not only for a great season, but an NFL career. As do, you know, there are several guys on this team I'm expecting to get drafted and get NFL looks. So yeah, exciting. But RJ, wow. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what he can do this year. I think he could top, you know, maybe statistically it won't be as, you know, as notable as last season just because he has Penny Boone there. But I think it's going to be just, you're going to notice the improvement. I mean, we're going into year 3 of him being a full-time running back when he spent his entire, you know, Pee-wee career to first year in college football being a quarterback. I think more and more things are going to click this year for him.
Yeah, the crazy thing is, you know, you mentioned Penny Boone. Penny Boone's a little bit taller than what RJ Harvey is, but he's pretty yoked too, to use your word, right? Like he's gonna I feel like he's gonna will stand back some people. So it'll be really interesting. Hopefully it's not a punter, right? But I think both of those guys, you know, in this league can punish break tackles, get yards after the tackle. And I think they're gonna put up a lot of yards. I mean, you look, both of them averaged over 6 yards per carry last season, and I expect that to continue. Look, KJ and the squad, they can attack you there. They can attack you with the run game. They've got great receivers, Kobe Hudson, some of the folks that they brought in, Burdell Richardson, you know, that's going to be on the come up. We've had some transfers that I think we're forgetting about in the receiving core as well. We've got depth at receiver, which is something we were worried about last year. This team offensively is ready to go. And I think this just proves it. Now, going back to the media days, Terry Mohajir was also there, obviously, and he had some comments there. He talked a lot about, a lot of people asked him, how did it feel this time around, as this was not the first time, the new kid on the block anymore, at the Big 12 media days. And he said that, that it definitely was different in how he interacted with the other ADs, how accepted, I guess, UCF was is the best way to put it. We're one of the guys now as far as the Big 12 and the Big 12 leadership is concerned, and how we're treated. So it was definitely a different experience. But he said it's also kind of strange because, as we talked about when we were talking about the schedule, there's 4 new kids on the block, and so you've got to meet them, you've got to talk with them, and some of them were also talking. And the running theme that you heard from the new ADs, especially the Colorado AD, was they're expecting full stadiums. And you heard the Utah man talk about that last week. This is going to be a new experience for the Pac teams, right? And some of the coaches are already, I think the Kyle Whittingham at Utah is already talking about how they're pumping in crowd noise to get them used to having crowd noise, because they're playing against Stanford and, the other Pac teams who didn't have that. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a rude awakening for some of the Pac teams next season when they get into some of these environments. But what I am hearing from a lot of the fans is they're excited about that. So I think this is going to be really, really interesting. The other thing that Terry Mohajir talked about was he said that he made a pretty bold proclamation and said that he's expecting all of our teams, all of them, doesn't matter what teams we're talking about, that within 5 years, they're going to be consistent top 10 programs. So, he's got lofty goals. That's the kind of thing that, we used to hear out of past ADs and his predecessor. And, he just seemed a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident at where UCF was. He talked a lot about how, we're in a better position to kind of absorb, kind of like what we've talked about on this show, absorb what's going on in the college football world with the pay for play kind of stuff that's going on now, and how student athletes will now be paid, for their participation in events and all of that stuff. And, when you're starting to talk about that, he really said, hey, look, we're best positioned to kind of absorb what's coming because we don't have the big budgets, and we're not going to have to pull away from the big budgets. And we don't have the challenges with the facility stuff that a lot of these folks have done. And he mentioned the TDT and how important it was that we're simply going to have to pay for the interest for those loans, and that we're not going to have to come up with the money and pay for it out of pocket. So that's exciting stuff. Terry Mohajir seems confident. I think to your point, the team and Coach Malzahn, everybody around the UCF program seems to have gotten that swag back. And, that's exciting because when UCF has that swagger, we do good things. All right, so let's talk a little bit. Today, the EA college football game dropped. If you did the early version, the Bounce House goes digital again. Yep, super excited about that. It was funny. A national publication, they put the first thing they led with was the civil conflict. They had UCF versus UConn, and then you had a beta tester that was playing UCF versus Cincinnati a few days ago that came out. And of course, UCF throttled them, and the beta tester seemed to be surprised at that. I don't know why. But it was, it's exciting stuff, man. I remember I had NCAA 2013, 2014. That was it. We didn't have it anymore. And a lot of things have happened, and now it's back. Do you have the game? Are you excited that it's back? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't been a gamer. Actually, the last time I remember playing, video games was I did bring my PS2 to my dorm at UCF freshman year at a PS2, and the game that I played all the time with my roommate was NCAA 14. which is funny. That was literally the last time I consistently played video games was freshman year in the dorm with NCAA 14. I remember playing a lot with Oklahoma. That Adrian Peterson was on that roster. So it was, I personally,
Dude, you missed Modern Warfare, Call of Duty,
all that stuff.
Dude,
Madden, all the Maddens.
that's not okay. Hold on, I gotta get a Nobrah. Can you throw a flag on this play, because that's absolutely terrible. He has not played Call of Duty. He's not played Modern Warfare. Can you please bring some levity to this conversation? What's going on right now?
I don't know. Some people just aren't gamers.
That's it. I think that's a good way of putting it.
I don't play sports games, period.
But you do play video games, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. What do you play?
I play Destiny, Rocket League. Well, I guess Rocket League's a sports game.
Yeah. That's it, Rocket League? You don't play anything else?
Not sports game wise.
No, but what other games?
God of War. I don't really play much COD unless my friends play it.
Modern Warfare?
Yeah, I played that when it came out. The new one.
The new one, yeah. All right, so Nobrah's not helping me out much here, but we have figured out he's a God of War fan, so we're going to drop him off on that because he's not helping the conversation.
To kind of talk about it, though, yeah, I mean, I think if anything were to get me to buy a new system like a PS5 or something, it would be this game. I know, a few of my friends are getting it, and I am excited to see, at least at the very least, the highlights, which some have come out of like UCF in the game, and hopefully I get to play with a friend just to try it out. But I think it's cool, and it's going to be cool to see the current roster. It's going to be cool to see how they manage, transfer portal and paying players and all these things that last time this game was out, none of it existed. So it's going to be interesting to see that new take. It's not like it's been out every year, so they've, slowly but surely kind of integrated all the new changes to college football. I mean, when you think about it, the last time that this game, existed, the Pac-12 was still around, the Big East was still around.
Technically, the Big East is still around. The Pac-12 is still around. But it's really the Pac-2.
There was a lot of teams that were in different conferences when this game was out. There wasn't teams in California playing in the Atlantic Coast Conference. That's for sure. And there wasn't the transfer portal. There wasn't NIL. So it'll be interesting to see. And obviously, as it pertains to UCF, we know that RJ was named a top 100 player. So that's cool. Was our only player in the 90s, got a ranked 91. And then looks like KJ and Penny Boone Penny Boone and KJ were our second and third highest rated players respectively. So I'm sure we'll see I'm curious to see what some of our other top players are rated, like a Kobe Hudson, like a Lee Hunter, like a Deshaun Pace. I'm interested to see, where in the 80s and stuff they got. And I mean, I'd like to eventually play it. Am I going to go out and buy a PS5 in this and drop whatever that is, $600-$700? Maybe not anytime soon, but I am curious to see how it looks.
Oh, come on, bro. You can write it off. You're a business owner. What are you talking about? You're doing marketing research.
There you go. I like it.
Now? Come on.
I'm writing it off. There you go.
There we go. Write off your PS5. You're doing marketing. You're looking at to see the advances in graphics and how well they're doing, and yeah. So
I'm trying to get EA as a client. Okay.
Oh well, yes, we definitely want that. Hey, very close UCF ties with EA Sports. For legal purposes, this is a joke. Nobrah with the save. I don't know, man. I mean, you can write things off. I'm just saying. One of my companies is a VR company. We're developing VR software, so I think I could probably swing it as an expense. I don't know, man. That being said, all right. So you mentioned the ratings. Do you think KJ's underrated? Do you think he's getting the shaft there?
I'm okay with an 87. I mean, I'd be curious to see what the other Big 12 quarterbacks got, like how much of a difference, like some of these, like Sanders and some of these guys. I mean, I don't know how many were in the high 90s. Like 95 plus. I mean, if some of the other top rated quarterbacks in the conference got, 89, 90, I'm okay with an 87. He might've been a little bit underrated, but just for the fact that he has been really good for quite a few years now and is coming into a team that's, where the system is designed for him and got a lot of weapons. He could have probably been a little higher, but I think he does have something to prove this year after a so-so year at Arkansas where they were, one of the lower tier teams in the SEC, and he didn't have the best year. So I'm okay with the ranking. I'd be curious to see how much. I mean, 87 is still fairly high. So unless these other QBs are like, I would.
Bro, if all you want is an 87,
huh?
I said, if all you want is an 87.
No, I want him to be higher. I just don't think it's ridiculously unfair. Is all I'm saying.
I know. I'm just joking around. All right, so that's it for the EA college football game. Enjoy it. Make sure you play it. It gets you ready for the preseason. We're excited about that. It'll get you through the preseason until we get to the games, which, 6 weeks. We're almost there. So you only have to suffer through 6 weeks of us babbling for a little while longer before we actually get to talk about some football. Now, one of those things I do want to mention, other than like, subscribe, follow, is that we will be doing some preview work as the season approaches. We're going to get some former UCF football players that will preview the defense and the offense for us. We're going to be talking a little bit about what our expectations are for the team, what the schedule looks like, what we feel like the outcome will be for the season, and what the ceiling is for this team. Everybody can talk about the floor, but what truly do we feel like this ceiling is? And so we'll look at that in a lot more detail. And then as far as defensively and offensively, we'll have the team break that down, the former team players break that down and what their expectations, what they expect us to do this season. And we'll see how that turns out. In other football news, realignment has reared its ugly head again. I mean, has it ever stopped really since 2016? This time, you've heard us talk about it, the ACC being on the chopping block. And, when FSU and Clemson decided to sue the ACC, it was like everybody kind of turned and looked around at each other like, it's a grant of rights. You're never going to get out of the grant of rights. This isn't going to go anywhere. This is just a publicity stunt, whatever. However, it seems like Florida State and Clemson are really chomping at the bit to get out of the ACC. A lot of news from reporters this past week has been that the SEC and the Big Ten are not really interested in adding either of those teams. I'm not sure if that's the case. Remember, Greg Sankey came out today and said something, but he said multiple times he's not interested in adding, or they're not adding FSU. Even David Strickland, the AD for Florida, has come out in the recent past and said, hey, if they add value, we'll bring them on. I feel like the bar is pretty high for FSU and for Clemson to make that make sense financially. So Brett Yormark, being who Brett Yormark is, he should be on Shark Tank for college football. We should have a college football Shark Tank and make these teams like come in front of the Shark Tank group and plead their case as to why they should join the conference. He's been exploring private equity. We've talked about that on a previous show and what that might look like. There's a lot of thought on why we would do that. Would we, as a conference, would it be worth us to throw Clemson and FSU a little bit more money, or help them pay their buyout, or whatever ends up happening with that? So the first question is, I think everybody's kind of been under the assumption that FSU and Clemson will get picked up by the SEC or Big Ten, and then that will kind of start the dominoes flowing. But now, it was smart of Brett Yormark to have the media days prior to the ACC media days. You've got everything that's going on with the lawsuit with FSU and Clemson and the ACC. And now the ACC is going to have to answer all of these questions. And Brett Yormark and the media buzz this past week has been that, Ross Dellinger, I believe, dropped the little nugget that he said that there's been informal talks between the Big 12 and the FSU and Clemson. I wouldn't doubt that. Number one, FSU and Clemson, given the situation they're in, and if they really push through on this lawsuit and get out of the ACC, if they did not have a landing spot locked up, I would not doubt that they were talking to the Big 12. And I can tell you, Daddy Yormark is thinking about how he can make that happen, because it solidifies, no matter what happens to the rest of the ACC, it solidifies that, especially FSU, it is a blue blood brand per se. And Clemson's a big brand in football. They haven't been doing as well lately, but they've won a lot of recent national championships. A few things to think about when that comes to play. One, it gives us two big properties with two big followings that are nationally relevant, that are, a big enough brand to compete for a national championship. They also, the last formula that came out with the college football playoff, because of the ACC not signing off on expansion, was predicated on the number of national championships that the teams had that were in the we're in the playoff discussion and in the conference. So this adds that pedigree and our ability to argue that on the next cycle, which is 5 years away, right? It does give us the ability to create exciting matchups. There's obviously the FSU and UCF being in the same conference would be exciting for UCF fans, but I think that renews that 90s FSU UF type of rivalry. Could UCF be that for FSU? And, who do they bring with them? If FSU and Clemson leave, does Miami come? I think that's the next biggest brand. Jason Shearer talked about that today. He said Clemson, FSU, Miami are the three top brands that Brett Yormark is targeting. And he's laying the foundation for all this questioning and really hurting the brand before the ACC media days. And that's going to be wild to me, is to see what is going to be said at the ACC media days with all of this swirling. I mean, what do you think about that, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, and what a time, first of all, the fact that, we were talking about, the Big 12 being down when they lose Oklahoma and Texas, then they go out and get, us and the other three. And then, they add to with the 4 Pac-12 schools. And now we're talking about a world where we could add Florida State, Clemson, and Miami. First of all, Florida State and Miami are schools that we've talked about for years, feeling that we want to play them. We've tried to get them an annual series or, whatever it is, several times, and they've balked at it most of the times, especially since we got better and more respectable. They've been very afraid to play us. The fact that we could be in the same conference would be great for just UCF and just the regionalism that's dying in college football, which is very sad. If we could have 3 major Florida programs in the same conference, I think that would be great for college football. I think that would be great for the Big 12. And I think that would be great for UCF in general. And, having more of a footprint in Florida with 3 schools in there, I think is great. Yeah, it's going to up the competition for recruiting and whatnot, but we already are competing with, Florida State, Florida, Miami for recruits. So bring it, first of all. But yeah, I mean, we talked about it on the show. I think we're heading down this pathway where we know the ACC is going to implode. I don't know, necessarily how they get out of grant of rights or whatever. But I love what Yormark is doing. To me, he looks like the savviest and the smartest, commissioner of all the major leagues. And I love how aggressive he is, and that he could sit there and just rest and be like, hey, look, we in the last 2 years, we've added 8 schools. We're good. We've reinforced ourselves. But no, he sees the writing on the wall of what the Big Ten and the SEC are doing to college football and what they plan on doing, and making it, them being the 2 premier ones. But if you can go in and add Florida State, Clemson, and Miami, you got a case for being a very, very, very great conference, and a case for making this a big 3 type of thing instead of a big 2. So, what's going on in the ACC? What their commissioner's doing, like you asked originally. I mean, it's hurting the brand. I mean, they're having a ton of in-conference fighting now, and what happened to the Pac-12? It seems like it's happening. You had it with USC and UCLA started the domino effect, and that's what's looking like what's going to happen here with Florida State and Clemson. But if we can bring them over to the Big 12, that is massive. I mean, let's be honest. When we lost Oklahoma and Texas, you lost the 2 brands in the Big 12. There's no remaining school in the Big 12 that is as nationally known and as, nationally a brand like those 2. Let's just call a spade a spade. But if you bring in Florida State, Clemson, Miami, you bring 3 schools that have over 10 national championships combined, 2 that have won in the last 10 years, 1 that's won multiple national titles within the last 6 years, and teams that have been to the playoffs multiple times in Florida State and Clemson. So yeah, that would be absolutely massive.
Well, I would correct you. 3 teams
ones
with national championships.
Yeah, I said 3. Yeah, 3. Florida State, Miami, Clemson have all won a national. Maybe I said 2, but I meant, 3. All 3 have, and that they've combined for. I was going to say, got to be over 10, with Miami having 5, Florida State I think has 3, and Clemson.
And I would argue 4 because UCF has a national championship.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah,
yes.
When you add that one in there.
Yeah. So either way, I think that's a big deal for the stability of the conference moving forward. And I don't think that the SEC wants to bring in more competition for playoff spots until they figure out how many playoff spots are going to be. Can they sway it? And for the Big 12, this is a hedge against losing even more playoff spots, because if the ACC does go away, right, or lose its quote unquote power status, that means that there's going to be more playoff spots up for grabs. And that will give UCF and the Big 12 the ability to gobble some of those up. It's, strategic thinking. We're ultimately gutting the top brands from the ACC, bringing them to the Big 12. And, again, it's a big hurdle on figuring out how to get them out of there, if that is going to happen. But Brett Yormark, one of the things that Jason Shearer said today too, is pretty confident that they'll get FSU and Clemson, in the long term. So he's pretty confident, and he's setting that stage. He's sowing discontent. You've got SMU, who today dropped a lawsuit against FSU, saying basically, hey, we took no money from this conference and you're trying to get out of it. So that's another new wrinkle to all of this. And, if you're talking about a conference in complete disarray, the ACC is that right now. Mm-hmm. It really is. And so even if you don't, like Brett Yormark went after Oregon and Washington when they left to the Big Ten, even if you don't get Florida State and Clemson, which I think we have a better shot than most people think because the money's not there, I do think that opens the door for the next group. So even if FSU and Clemson didn't come or didn't want to come, that next group, you better believe they're making phone calls to the Big 12 to make sure that they've got a landing spot, because they know once they go away that the mythos of the ACC goes away, because who else do they have left? They've got Virginia. They've got North Carolina. North Carolina's made some noise recently in football, but they're a basketball school. The tough part about bringing North Carolina to the Big 12, if those two were to come, is that, you have to bring both. North Carolina and NC State, so you leave Miami out. So which is the better deal? Do you take the twofer, or do you take Miami and one other team? And if that was the case, what would be the other team that you would take if we took Clemson, FSU, and Miami?
It's a good question. I mean, and you said, wait, UNC's not an option, or?
Well, I don't think it would be, because you have, the North Carolina legislature recently passed legislation that said you had to take both. If one left, both of them had to go. And I know that, a lot of the decision making on Tobacco Road has been basketball centric. And I think we have a good basketball conference that we can monetize, right? Mm-hmm. However, at the same time, we're not basketball centric in our thinking. We're still a football first conference when it comes to decisions.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, if you can't take UNC, which is obviously a brand name, and then I guess none of the North Carolina kind of schools, my thought for just purposes of I think, they haven't necessarily been great recently, but as far as football history and I think the ability to be good again, I like the idea of Virginia Tech. They've had some really, really strong football seasons. They have a pretty rich history. They have an amazing environment and stadium. Because like you said, we're football centric. Obviously, if we're talking basketball, there's then you're thinking Virginia, or you're thinking obviously any of the North Carolina schools if that was a possibility. But I'm thinking, with the remaining, there's Georgia Tech, there's Syracuse, there's Boston College, there's Pitt. None of those are super sexy to me from a football perspective, but Virginia Tech, I do think, has the possibility of, being a school that is, they've been very good at football in the past. They have a lot of tradition. And I think they would add something from a football perspective. So to me, that probably, if I had to choose kind of, one other team, I think for Virginia Tech would be a good one. I mean, this team that's, they've won 11 ACC titles. They have some great rivalries. They've had some All-American players. This isn't, obviously they've had some, really good players like a Michael Vick and whatnot. So I don't think this is any sort of, obviously out of the four, when you consider Clemson, Miami, Florida State, they're probably the worst one, but they do have a pretty rich history. And I do think that they would add something. What do you think?
Well, the other interesting candidate to me, I like Virginia Tech, but the other interesting candidate to me would be Louisville. Oh, Louisville has, they were almost a Big 12 member when West Virginia came back. They give you a partner for Cincinnati and West Virginia. You have that Big East connection there as well. And more importantly, they have a lot of money. They have money to throw at NIL. They have money to throw and they are throwing it at football and basketball. So I think when it comes to a team, last year they made some noise again. When it comes to a team that could bring value to the conference that's kind of on the precipice, I think Louisville fits the bill there. I think from a basketball perspective, the Rick Pitino years and all the sanctions and stuff have kind of made them take a step back. But if you're talking about a school that's like-minded as far as who the Big 12 is, that wants to win and has demonstrated that they're willing to throw money at it and have the ability to do that, especially and having a rich basketball history, if we start separating out the football and basketball contracts, I think Louisville fits the bill. I wouldn't be mad at Virginia Tech. They have a big fan base. I actually made the case for them on another podcast that we participated on the College Huddle. But I think Louisville, my picks were Florida State, Clemson, Louisville, and Virginia Tech. But I think if you get the chance to get Miami, you do it just because of the Florida connection and the ability to build rivalries within the state of Florida, which I think is is something that the Big 12 needs, and I think would be instant viewership. And it would be properties that, the Big 12 would want to sell to folks who put on ESPN and Fox. So if you think about it, you'd basically have a rotating rivalry game. I think you at that point would make some permanent pairings, for lack of a better term. It would benefit Miami, would benefit FSU, would benefit UCF by giving them 2 additional games in the state of Florida every year. And I think you could build that into, some pretty unique properties. I mean, look at what happened with the Cows and UCF and what it turned into as a Black Friday game, in 2016, 2017. It had some pretty good ratings, and it was good enough to be on ABC on Black Friday. I think that if you add, you take that up a notch, if you add Miami and if you add Florida State. And I think if you add Louisville, I think that gives another good piece to that East Coast. However, if you take two Florida schools, Virginia and the DMA in Virginia is a big DMA because you get, you get Virginia, you get the DMV. So Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. And Virginia Tech, having lived in Maryland, I can tell you, has as many, if not more, and is actually a more popular team in the DMV for football than what Virginia is. So, that's a tough sell. They fill their 65,000 seat stadium. They've been, consistently a name in college football. They haven't done as well lately, but I think they would be a good ad for a lot of reasons. And I think of the remaining schools, if you did not take Louisville, I think they would provide a good option there as well and give you a new state. So that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Louisville is a very interesting option. I mean, for all the reasons you stated, and yeah, it would give you that presence in the DMV area, or I guess no, well, yeah, close to it. But that's for Virginia Tech. But for Louisville, they bring a lot to the table football wise and basketball wise. They've won a national championship in basketball, even though it was, I guess, axed from the record books or whatever. But football wise, yeah, I mean, especially recently, they've had some great battles. I mean, they were in the ACC championship last year against Florida State. They're a perennial contender in the conference. They've been much more nationally relevant than Miami has in any recent years. And even Florida State, while Florida State was down, I mean, a lot of that, while Clemson was running that conference, Louisville was usually a number 2, a number 3 up there. They've obviously had a Heisman winner recently in Lamar Jackson, Teddy Bridgewater. And yeah, we've also, UCF from a kind of a home front, have had some good battles with Louisville in recent years. And I think they would also bring a lot to the table. So if you told me Louisville, you told me Virginia Tech, I'd be happy. I think if you look at compared to, if you took Florida State, Miami, Clemson, Louisville, that is a massive upgrade over any of the 4 Pac-12 schools we took. No disrespect to them, but outside of Utah, the other 3 are historically not great in football. I mean, I know Arizona had a great year last year. I know Colorado way back in the day was a contender. But you talk about any of the 4 we just mentioned from the ACC. I mean, they're nationally relevant, deserved or not, every single year. And there's definitely been a lot of recent success for at least 2 out of those 4, if not 3, if you talk about Louisville. So that would bring our conference to a whole new level, give us brand names that we lost when we lost OU in Texas. So I think it's great. And I just Yormark compared to like our Resco and the AAC, it's just, I mean, I know it's a different level of college football, but I just, I think a lot of people in the American, especially UCF fans, complained a lot about Oresco. So to just have this, we stepped up our game in every facet of a football.
Well, I think UCF fans never felt like he had our back. Like when we were making claims about, who we were and whether we should be in the playoff and whatever, he would always, he seemed meek. I mean, he did the Power 6 campaign, which is great from a marketing standpoint, but the execution of it was just terrible. It was just terrible. And he never seemed to support UCF. And I think, honestly, he knew we wanted out and we wanted more. Because of that, I think he kind of took a step back. But you're right. He played in the shadows. He thought he wanted to play by the rules. Brett Yormark plays in the shadows, but he's a killer. He's like legitimately like 80s, like hostile takeover king thought process from New York. I mean, legit, like watch your back. He will do a hostile takeover. So, you know, legitimately, I think that man, people should be scared. I think, you know, Sankey as Greg Sankey, as masterful as he's been behind the scenes, I think that Brett Yormark can even out Sankey. So he knows how to play the media. He knows how to undermine the value of other properties. He knows how to come up with new ideas, right? He doesn't play within the framework. Sankey does. And I think he does it in a way that ultimately he is an asset to this conference and has basically, he's got a plan to create as many opportunities as he can for us to elevate the conference and stay relevant. And I think that's the most important piece of this pie. So yes, I think he's good for the Big 12. I hope we hang on to him for a long time. Guys like that tend to move on more quickly. You know, once they've kind of fixed whatever it is and then put that feather in their cap, they tend to move on for the next big thing. And I think he's going to stay in sports. And I think he's a killer. He's like a straight up, like,
He's a gangster.
Like, yeah, he's gangster for sure. Like shades dropping down meme, like gangster, right? Like he's a G. So we'll just put it, you know, he's over there quoting, you know, he's quoting Jay-Z. Let's just put it that way and applying it to business. So if that tells you anything about Brett Yormark, that should tell you everything you need to know. While at the same time, he projects himself, he articulates himself well. I don't know, at the media days, he seemed a little uncomfortable with the tall dais that he was behind because he's not exactly the tallest in stature. But he's well-spoken, he's well thought out, he's constantly looking for opportunities, and that's who the Big 12 needed. Now, do you think, and I'm going to ask you this question, that Brett Yormark's leadership of the Big 12, would he have invited UCF to the conference?
When, you're saying?
Either then or now.
Would Yormark have added us under what scenario? I'm not sure I understand.
Like
that.
When we were at it, like when OU and Texas left, would he have made the decision to extend an invite to UCF and the other schools? And
was he not the Big 12 commissioner when we got him?
No, Bob Bowlesby was the one that got us.
Right. Yeah, Trollsby. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. Completely forgot about Bob Bowlesby. It feels like it's been forever since he was the commissioner. You know, part of me thinks yes, because Yormark is a visionary and a guy that can see, you know, what UCF brings to the table. And I think I think Bob Bowlesby was probably looking more at our recent success and that we had become a name. I think Yormark would have looked at it more perspective of the potential in the future. Yes, of course, he would have considered the fact that we've been nationally relevant recently, had won 2 major bowl games, blah, 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 all the things we talk about. But I think he would have looked at, you know, that the fact that the Big 12 has had, and, you know, if UCF hadn't been in it yet, has no Florida footprint. And I think, you know, obviously at that time, not knowing that Florida State was going to potentially exit the ACC or make a stink about their, you know, grant of rights and all that. I think he would, obviously UCF is the only at that time group of 5 choice that made any sense in Florida. So, and still obviously. So I think he would have, I just think he's smart like that. I mean, you know, if there's a scenario right for Texas and OU left where he could replace them with, you know, Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, then probably not. But if it was the exact same scenario, but you just flip the commissioner from Bowlesby to him, I think he would have invited us.
Interesting. Yeah, I think let me say this about that. I think Bowlesby saved the Big 12. I think he 100% did, and he should get credit for that.
Yeah.
I think he was smart to move when he did. I do think that he didn't have the vision that Yormark does, and I don't think he would have went after bigger fish. I think he was so consumed with trying to make a move to change the narrative and keep the teams, the leftover 8 or hateful 8 or whatever you want to call them, from leaving to the pack that, and quite frankly, I think this narrative, the timing for UCF, honestly, was impeccable. You had USC, as we learned later, USC was trying to get out of trying to get to the Big Ten at the time. So they were shutting everything down. We talked to the Utah man offline yesterday, and he said, when the leftover 8 was reaching out, USC was basically shutting everybody down because they knew they were going to leave, right? So they didn't want to increase any additions. So you had this window of opportunity. I do think Brett Yormark would have tried, and I don't think it would have been possible at the time, but I think he would have tried earlier and tried to pull bigger brands than what UCF was at that time. Mm-hmm. However, I do think ultimately, if he didn't have that opportunity, he would have made the same decision. And I would argue he would have probably pulled BYU and UCF and not necessarily Houston and Cincinnati. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I think Bowlesby grabbed all 4 of us because not just to get the numbers up for the conference, but also to make sure that he had a hedge if anybody left for the pack. Because people forget, it wasn't a foregone conclusion at that time. The pack could have very easily said, hey, we'll take a few teams, and then who knows what would have happened. You know what I mean? But UCF was very, very lucky in today's environment. So if we looked at UCF as a how we're kind of stack ranking the teams in the ACC, where would UCF stand as an ad if we were in the ACC with Miami, FSU, and Clemson? Obviously, FSU and Clemson, you try to take them first, but UCF versus Miami, who do you take?
Now, obviously, you're saying?
Yeah, so if we were in the situation now, right, and, there's this variability within the ACC or volatility within the ACC, and the thought process is that there may be a shakeup where FSU and Clemson leaves and other teams may be looking. If you had a third and a fourth spot, and obviously Miami would be a take for us at number 3, if UCF was in the ACC right now instead of the Big 12, would you take UCF over Miami?
That's interesting. I just...
And try to take your black and gold glasses off. I know I tried to do that too.
I think, my gut here says that I think most commissioners and most college football executives and power brokers and power players still view Miami as the better, more household name program. I mean, it's like we talked about with Trey on that one episode. Like, they literally get nationally ranked preseason every single year purely based on their name. Yeah, I know they have top recruiting classes and I'm not doubting they definitely bring in talented high school players. There's no doubt about that. And they probably, I haven't looked at their portal stuff, but I'm sure they're able to attract top talent in the portal too. But, I think they still get a lot of love from winning a national championship 20 plus years ago. That UCF's cachet in that department is just not the same. I just think that Miami is still, as much as there's plenty of people that joke about them that, hey, talk to us when you're relevant in this decade or the last 2 decades for that matter. When you talk about the media, when you talk about college football execs, I still think they respect Miami more as a kind of a OG type of power program that was good in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s more than they respect a new kid on the block like UCF. And so, yeah, I really think that that's just the case. Doesn't mean we're not better than them on the field. Doesn't mean we couldn't beat them, head to head. Doesn't mean that our future's not better than them. But I think just how the world works and how college football works, a lot of people live and look in the past. I mean, it's not just Miami either. There's a lot of programs that get love like Texas, Miami. I mean, I know Texas was in the playoff last year, but in general, these teams that I could probably rattle off 5 to 10 teams that get preseason top 25 every year and finish the year outside of the top 25. And they get it over more deserving teams that are bringing in better teams in that year, had a better off season, had a really good previous season that, that momentum can carry over. It was like when UCF, after the 2017 team, when they brought back nearly everyone, and we're, after finishing the season number 6 in the country, I think we were preseason ranked number 22, which is ridiculous. We should have been higher. So I think, I think that they would take Miami. That was a long-winded way of saying that.
Well, I mean, you gave your reasons for it, right? So I think that Brett Yormark is interesting to me because he doesn't play by establishment rules. I think the things that Miami has going against it is they have nobody in the stands.
True.
They seem to be a declining program. They're not on the upswing and have been for a while. They've got Mario Cristobal. I don't think he's going to do anything for them for a while. I think they're at least another coach away from being relevant in football. Yes. Do they have the NIL? Yes. Do they have Miami? But realistically speaking, if UCF gets the time slots that Miami does, I don't know. I mean, last season's 6 and 7 season wasn't confidence inspiring, right? No. But I do think that he thinks, to your point that you said earlier, he's a little more visionary. Do I think Miami still gets the nod? Yeah, I do think Miami still gets the nod. However, I think Yormark thinks about it a lot harder than I think someone of Bob Bowlesby's ilk or anyone else would. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation, but it just goes to show how lucky the timing worked out for UCF, that we are where we are. I do think that, in general, Big 12 football is better football than ACC football. So I do think we would do better. However, we played Duke and got our noses kicked in. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting discussion point. I think maybe a few years down the road in the ACC that conversation might be different. But I think today, if today's situation was you pick Miami or UCF to join the Big 12 conference, I think Miami does get the nod. Okay. One last thing on this, what does this mean for TV contracts? And then we're gonna get to a would you rather. I do think that this sets us up. I think Brett Yormark is getting the best inventory that he possibly can to set us up for the next contract. I think he wants to get more than the ACC, whether the ACC completely goes away or not, which I don't think they would. If FSU and Clemson leave, I think they're more likely to stay stable. If it's FSU and Clemson that comes to UCF, if FSU and Clemson goes to the SEC or the Big 10, and then the Big 12 picks off some other middle tier or schools, then I think they're in bigger trouble of getting basically demoted, kind of like all of the Big East with the brands that they have left in football. So, I do think that this sets us up that way. I think it would increase the contract dollars, and the thought process with the PE is it might be worth it at that point to do that, to get the higher college football playoff dollars, because we would get more shares of that if they left. I think that the TV contract itself would be much higher, and it goes towards the trend of consolidation because they do have that look-in period, although ESPN is still married to the ACC for another 11 years. It's interesting, but I think it keeps us relevant. I think that it puts us much closer in parity to the SEC and the Big Ten. I think the rest of the conference is better than what a lot of the schools in the Big Ten and the SEC are performing at. You've got 2 or 3 top schools in the SEC every year that seem to be the same schools, and everybody else is kind of meh, right? They're mediocre. Big Ten's the same way. You've got Michigan, you've got Ohio State, You got
Penn
Wisconsin
State.
that makes noise every once in a while, and Penn State. Those are the 4 major brands, and everybody else is meh. Who cares about Illinois? Who cares about Indiana? Who cares about Northwestern? Nobody. And they haven't been relevant in years. So I do think it makes a big difference. I think from a perception perspective, and it gives us that playoff boost because FSU is seen as a team that could make the playoff and possibly win the playoff when you're talking about the top 10 or so teams that most people expect to contend on a year in and year out basis for a college football playoff spot. So I think that does make a big difference in the playoff money and the TV contracts, and ultimately gets us closer and maybe even pushes the ACC further down the ladder from a money perspective. And that seems to be how we identify the power two these days. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this a bunch, but yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, the TV contract, you know, obviously UCF is already going to get a big boost in revenue, but when you add Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and whatever, potentially Louisville or Virginia Tech or whatever, yeah, I mean, that makes us much more attractive to ESPN or Fox or whomever. You know, I don't know all the details of our current TV contract, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's like what we've been talking about for the last hour is that Florida State, Clemson, and Miami are household names. You know, whether you hate Miami, whether you hate Florida State, it just is a fact that, you know, at the very least, Clemson and Florida State bring eyeballs to TVs. When Florida State and Clemson play every year, it's a massive game. When Clemson plays a lot of teams, it's a massive game. Even though they're, you know, somewhat down right now, even though they're still, you know, winning 10 games, they're just not in the, you know, in the playoffs or haven't been in the playoffs for the last couple of years. You know, you have a personality like Dabo Swinney. Everyone in college football, I mean, you could probably realistically, unless you're a huge college football fan, probably name about 10 coaches, and Dabo Swinney is one of them. He brings attention. He's kind of like Deion Sanders, not on that level, obviously, but he brings eyeballs, and so does Clemson. They always have a lot of storylines preseason, and then Florida State too. You know, they're especially recently they've been back. They had an undefeated, you know, regular season. Had a lot of controversy around what happened, but they bring a lot of eyeballs to the table too. I mean, when you talk about those week 0 games that are very exciting every single year, Clemson and Florida State are usually in them. You know, as far as like a non-conference game, Clemson will play a big team. They played LSU recently. They played Georgia recently. Florida State's had week 0 games against Alabama, LSU. So they bring a lot of eyeballs, and they are programs that the average fan knows. So yeah, I think it absolutely increases the value of a potential future TV contract.
All right. So that brings us to the aforementioned would you rather. So there's been a lot of noise in the college football world amongst Big 12 fans as to whether uneven revenue sharing. So let's say the Big 12 doesn't just pay for them to get out of the ACC, and the, you know, FSU, I think more so than Clemson. It's funny because Clemson's fans seem to be all about the Big 12 train. They are all about that. They've all been very supportive of it. You know, there's a lot of thought process that Clemson wants to get out from under the thumb of Tobacco Road, and they kind of hate the ACC at this point. There's a lot of bad blood, and you know, whereas FSU, on the other hand, their fans are like, we only go there for a paycheck. So if it takes the Big 12 to do uneven revenue sharing, and let's say they get an extra $10 million a year over everybody else, would you rather have FSU and Clemson with uneven revenue sharing, or would you rather, you know, take your chances that the Big 12 gets rated down the road or becomes less relevant when it comes to the Big 3 in the next contract cycle?
Yeah, it's a good question. This one is, for me, is a lot more cut and dry than the last would you rather that we had on this podcast.
1 hour later.
What was that?
1 hour later.
Yeah, exactly. 1 hour later. Yeah, I did. Look, I think we have to, with how college football is shifting right now and changing seemingly by the day, by the minute, you have to do everything you can to position yourself to be where you're playing for the top prize and being in a relevant space, a relevant conference, just in being relevant in general. And Florida State and Clemson bring that, certainty to, I guess I did, bring that certainty to relevance. So yeah, if they got paid more, first of all, UCF is already getting paid less than the Big 12 schools in the first couple of years anyways. But quite frankly, I think that a Florida State and a Clemson deserve more than a West Virginia or than a Kansas, at least we're talking about football. I'm sorry. I mean, they just are more nationally relevant. People, at the end of the day, you have to look at, the TV viewer numbers. What game is going to produce, more eyeballs? Is it going to be a Florida State Clemson rivalry game in the Big 12, or is it going to be a Kansas State game? I mean, just the facts are the facts. And I would be, if that was, obviously I would love to try to negotiate where that's not the case, but if it was a sticking point and they were like, we need to get paid more, I'm okay with that. Would be the two most premier programs in the conference, and they probably do deserve a little bit more money. Maybe there's a way how the contract written, it eventually evens out, or it's contingent on other factors as the future goes. But if it means, there's a chance that UCF is, we don't take them, and UCF is part of a conference that one day blows up and we're relegated to, second tier, not worth the risk for me. Look, we came from a place where our conference payout was total crap. So if we can, we've already much elevated our revenue, and with them on the fold and a potential new TV deal, we probably get even more. So yeah, I'm okay with them making more. At the end of the day, they can probably demand that. They have the power to do that. I mean, Clemson, whether Clemson and Florida State are, down, at the end of the day, college and sports in general are cyclical. They're going to come back up. Florida State is up right now. I mean, they just went undefeated, and Clemson, as much as they aren't what they were maybe in 2016, 2017, they're still a perennial contender and could easily make the playoff in any given year. So I'm okay with it.
Okay. So for me, I'll say it this way. There's two ways to look at this. There's to look at it as a UCF fan or a fan of one of these individual schools. And I think fan bases like OSU or K-State or whatever have a even better case to be made as to making that decision or not. But at the end of the day, from the Big 12's perspective, you're looking at adding another property, and Brett Yormark's responsibility is not to UCF. It's to the conference in general, right? So that decision is going to be made by the K-States of K-States of the world, et cetera, as to whether their ADs and presidents sign on this. I feel like if the Big 12 conference, because they get a share, right? They're funded by a share of the TV contract. If they were to take on and say, hey, we'll take the PE funds out, we feel like the valuation of the conference is going to be much higher in playoff money and TV contract money, because they're asking for, the PE firm is asking for private equity or a 20% share of the conference. If they're taking or not of the conference, of the TV revenue contract, they're betting, and there's a lot of smart people that are doing a lot of math to figure out whether this is a good bet or not. If they're willing to take the risk with us, I feel like if the Big 12 said, hey, we're going to do this, but we're going to take the risk, right? Because really there's no money coming out of any one of these pockets. It's just 20% of the conference's share of the TV revenue, which right now is split 16 ways, right? So if the conference spends the money, gets FSU and Clemson out of jail, and we can sign them to a longer term deal, I would say, like a 10-year grant of rights or something like that. I would say absolutely do it. With the understanding that it's for a short period of time until the next contract cycle comes up, and then everybody gets equal revenue shares. And, the PE firm would probably get a portion of that extra amount. That staves off, if we can kill the ACC conference and take those schools on, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to make an argument for why they should get more of that playoff revenue as part of it, as a percentage of what the ACC gives up if it doesn't exist anymore, or gets demoted. But at the end of the day, if it gives us the ability to be relevant long-term, and they take regular shares just like everybody else after they get out of the conference and after the new contract for TV and or playoff is said and done, I think we do it. I think we'd be stupid not to if we had the ability to do it. That's looking at it from a conference standpoint. From a Yormark standpoint, from a fan standpoint, I think, and from a football AD and AD standpoint, president standpoint, that's going to be a hard pill to swallow. At the end of the day, they went through this. They went through this with Texas. It broke down a conference, with Missouri leaving. The Big 12 commissioner actually wanted to come up with a TV network back then, but the schools at that time thought that they could get more in third tier rights than what the network did. Then he went to the Big 10 and started it there, right? And you saw how successful that was. But the fallout out of that, after they did go to Texas making more money and all the politics that went behind it, you lost Mizzou, you lost Nebraska, you lost a lot of big name brands because of all of that. So I think they're going to be a little gun shy about that. And I think they also are a little gun shy about saying, hey, if you're going to play in our conference and we're going to give you access to our playoff berths and our bowl games, then, you need to be on an equal revenue share as the rest of us. Because the perception is then that FSU and Clemson are better brands. And at this time when consolidation is happening, they're going to want, and UCF included, we're going to want to position ourselves as the best brands that we possibly can for the next contraction, if that ends up happening. So it'll be really, really interesting to see what the old heads of the Big 12 who've been through this before think of this, and whether the ADs and presidents can do that. And Yormark is going to have to convince them to do that. I mean, supposedly we already took slightly less shares to bring on the corner schools, the four corner schools, right? To make that work. But I think Yormark will have a plan with ESPN and Fox, and we'll have game plan this out. And I think that if we take 2, we take 4. Unless the only way that they can get out of it is if we pay for it. I think ultimately the FSU and Clemson thing will be negotiated damages. The question is, will the SEC and the Big Ten want to take the hit on fronting that money for them up front to bring them on, or wait for them to either go source the money themselves, or for the Big 12 to take the hit and then try to take them later when they don't have that problem. So the GOR and the grant of rights and how long that's going to be is going to be key to that. If it's a rental and we get higher playoff dollars and a higher TV dollar amount, and then they end up leaving anyway with a pretty large fee, I think that's going to play into it as well, because it'll be a negotiated settlement, in my opinion, with the ACC, because they cannot sustain their conference the way it is right now. You've got the conference being sued. You've got schools suing each other now with the SMU lawsuit. It's just a bad situation, and I think they figure a way to get out of it. Now, the wild card is going to be, what options does UNC and Virginia have? Are they actually open to it? And they'll at least know how much it'll cost them to get out of the conference, to get into the new conference that they want to get into, whether it be Big 10 or SEC, which I think for UNC, it's the Big 10. That may be what they're waiting on to initiate contact, and what the SEC and the Big 10 is going to wait on. How much does it cost for these guys to get out before they make the financial calculation, if it makes sense? There's something to be said for a first mover advantage. I think Brent Yormark is willing to take the risk, and so is the PE company. And from what I've seen thus far, and again, I don't have all the details, it doesn't seem like a leverage buyout or a bad deal for the Big 12. So roll the dice, see what happens. You got to do something to stay on par. All right. Last or second to last thing we have to talk about, that's kind of interesting. A lot happened this week. The Third Circuit Court ruled that college athletes can be considered or should be considered employees. So, they have a list of criteria that says this is what an employee is. Do they get compensated in kind for their work? And there's a bunch of criteria there. But at the end of the day, the Third Circuit Court ruled in this big lawsuit that the NCAA was pushing against and tried to leverage by accepting the settling the other lawsuit. They were trying to enlist Congress and helping them to keep that designation away from college athletes. Well, the courts have come back and said, hey, guess what? These folks are now employees. And if they're employees, that opens up a whole host of other issues when it comes to taxes and everything else. So as NIL gets brought into the fold, which is part of this settlement agreement and what was happening, there's a lot of underlying things from a quote unquote HR standpoint that are going to have to be figured out by college football. And it just pushes us more towards a professional model. And if anything, it pushes us further down that train of, I think, a breakaway, which Charlie Baker, who's the head of the NCAA, has already said there needs to be a separate division for the power schools. And the Big 12 has already said we're going to participate in whatever that looks like and is part of that group. So there is going to be another separation, whether there'll be a full separation or not. It'd be interesting to see what the fallout is from the court's decision of making folks employees and really, truly making this professional athletes.
Yeah, I mean, it's where we're heading. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, I think we've already gotten to a level where, it's essentially turned into the mini NFL, with free agency and paying the players and everything. I mean, they essentially kind of are employees. And then obviously the teams are going to be able to, pay the kids directly now. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it just is kind of on par with everything that's happening in college athletics. So, obviously it's going to spawn other issues and all types of other legal stuff and tax stuff and everything. But I mean, at this point, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I know they get called student athletes, but let's be honest, they're athlete students. At least it's kind of always been that way, but now it's really, really that way. So, when you talk about, some of these kids making millions or hundreds of thousands and, they're someone that is an ambassador for the school and represents the school and, makes sense that they're going to, basically be employees.
Well, and get punished if they do something outside of school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me because I feel like it pushes us more towards that professional model. You mentioned the transfer portal. We have salary caps now. Like with this lawsuit, it was 20% of the media rights deal. So some schools are going to have an advantage there versus others. Based on the size of the media rights deal that they have and how much they can offer in compensation. But the transfer portal really isn't free agent model because in the free agent model, you have the school would have the ability that if someone signs and is an employee, they could put them under an employment contract for a period of time. So if anything, it could fix that loophole, which is right now everybody's transferring everywhere. Right. And there's no all the investment that you put into a quote unquote student athlete now. If they're entitled to be called employees, then we need to put them under employment contracts and have them, for whatever their agreement is, for at least 2 to 3 years. The amount of money that's being dumped in NIL, the amount of money that's being dumped into training, scholarship value, all of those other things, it absolutely needs to turn into, if we're doing a free agency, there needs to be some sort of ability to sign these guys to longer contracts. Now, the challenge with that is, do you tie performance metrics to that? Now you can as an employee, right? And if they are not performing the way that they're supposed to on the field, can you fire them? You know what I mean? That's the other question. And what rights do the student athletes have around that? But I think that's something that, there's a whole host of federal regs that go around that, tax implications that go along with that. Our professors, you heard Josh talk about this. Our professors going to be okay with quote unquote professional amateur athletes making more money than they are. There's a lot of questions that are there for that. And can you make it, some states are at will, others are not, which means either party can separate the agreement, the employment contract, right? And does that apply? How can you lock these folks in longer term so that you get a return on your investment if you're going to dump that kind of money and have them as employees, while at the same time give yourself the flexibility that if they're not working out on their roster, that you can get rid of them. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. But I think ultimately, as it pertains to the transfer portal, that's going to be an important component of it. All right, last topic for the evening. We're at 1:51 with just the two of us. First round of home playoff games. The new college football playoff executive director, Rich Clark, came out and said on the selection committee, picking the first round, so just the first round, home teams. These are first round games that are going to be played on campus in the new format. He said they will be looking at weather, hotel availability, and ticket sales. Now, we had a little bit of a discussion about that early on. How do you feel about that? I mean, I think it's BS when it comes to, how big of a deal home field advantage is in football, and specifically college football in the first rounds. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I said this before the show. I mean, that's so stupid. I mean, so that means there's literally no incentive to be a 5. If there's 4 buys, for example, in this 12-team playoff, there's no incentive to be a higher seed. I mean, I guess other than maybe when you're, I guess, unless you're just talking about pure like matchups, if you're like, if you are a 12 seed, it stands to reason that you're going to be playing a harder team, in the first round, for example. But other than that, in every sport, in professional, and just in general, you get rewarded. Well, I don't think the playoff is stupid. I think that specific element is stupid because in every other sport, you work so hard in the regular season to get that home ice, that home field, that home court. And that's we know in sports that home advantage is a real thing. It's palpable. It's actual real thing that happens, and it can really propel you to a win if you're down, or, I mean, just that crowd. And in college football, the crowd, I think, is one of the best things in college football. And I think it actually is the most home field advantage compared to any other sport. Just the fact that stadiums in general are bigger, they have more people, the fan bases are more passionate, they've been around longer. And if you've worked yourself to be the 5 seed, which is, I guess one of the top 5 teams in college football, or, I know it's a little bit subjective, but whatever, somewhere in that range. And then you have to go play, let's just say, for example, whatever the 5 seed is has, let's say 2 or 3 more wins in the 12 seed. And it's UCF that's the 12 seed. And that 5 seed has to go play UCF because of, weather or whatever. I don't think I would love it, but imagine having to go play at a raucous crowd like UCF or whatever, Michigan or any of these schools, Penn State, that have just a very unique home field advantage. So what was your point of, I mean, obviously you want to win as many games as you can in general, but to not get rewarded for that just seems silly to me. I just think you work really hard and especially a lot of big complaint that's happened with the playoff. If there's been one common complaint across the board, a lot of people say that it devalues the regular season. Now you've just added a whole nother layer to that by saying, well, at least you could point to, all right, maybe it devalues, you have to win less games, but you could still get home field advantage in the first round of the playoffs and have a much better chance of advancing to the next round. You take that out of it. Now it's like, you take that element out of it. It really kind of does devalue the regular season. I don't believe that as much as other people do. I mean, you still have to win games or you're not going to be in the playoffs. You still have to have a top 12 team, top 12 record, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to really remove that home field advantage, I think that makes sense. And that makes it so subjective. I mean, first of all, weather can change day to day just because it says it's going to rain or whatever, snow. It may not. If it says it a week out or 2 weeks out, I don't know how quickly they have to plan this. I guess ticket sales isn't subjective. That's kind of a factor or whatever. But, I just think some of those things are super subjective, and that whereas if you have a better record, there's no subjectivity that you have the better record. So I don't know. I think it's dumb. So
well,
yes.
I mean, it's okay. Let's use the G5 because we're recently G5, right? So let's use us versus, a cold weather school like, I don't know, Maryland, right? So let's say it's us versus Maryland in one of the early playoff games. I think UCF, it's advantageous for UCF when it comes to the weather, when it comes to hotel availability, right? But ticket sales, like, that's subjective, right? So you're getting penalized for the size of your stadium, right? So Maryland has I've been to their stadium. I went to the game there. It has like a stadium that seats 60-some thousand people. I don't remember what it exactly seats, but UCF doesn't, right? We're adding some loge seating and some box seating and whatever with the new tower that's going in. But does that mean if Maryland and UCF square off that Maryland gets the advantage because it has more seating? I mean, you see that on a smaller scale when it comes to baseball and softball, as far as hosting tournament games. And I guess you could kind of look at this as a tournament game too. But I think in football, it makes a much bigger difference than it does in baseball or any other sport. So I don't think, I agree. I don't think that should have any relevance. I understand why they're looking at it from a TV perspective, and viewership and ticket sales perspective, because of these games are going to be played on campus and there's a percentage that goes to the school. But then again, like, the school that's hosting gets a percentage of those sales. So you're saying that the other team that has the smaller stadium potentially is not going to get the same amount of income out of that, out of that game. At the very least, they get a smaller percentage. So, I don't know. I do agree that it kind of lends itself to the trope that's valid, that, it's subjective, not objective. And when it comes to playoff football, it should be objective based on the team that's playing on the field. Otherwise, you're not playing a game.
Yeah, I mean, also, you had mentioned hotel availability. I mean, you just talked about, for example, ticket sales being, you're penalized if you have a smaller stadium, right? Like UCF, for example. But hotel availability, that's the same thing. I mean, if you compare Orlando's hotel availability to whatever, Stillwater, Oklahoma, I don't know if we're talking about percentage based or whatever, but in general, a bigger city is going to have way more hotels in general. I don't, as far as their availability and occupancy, like, I don't know, maybe percentage wise, it could be very different, but like in general, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands more hotels in Orlando than Stillwater, Oklahoma. So that's not really fair either. Cause how can you compare Orlando, Tampa, a major city to some super small college town, like even like Penn State, for example. I've wanted to go to games. I've heard it's very, very hard, not only just to fly there, but also to get, just hotels during the season because it's such a small town. So Orlando, though, not only could you stay in Orlando, there's many surrounding areas that are very close enough. So a big city is going to win that battle every single time. And that doesn't make any sense to me how you can even include that too. So you combine that with the weather, which I don't know how you plan the weather out a few weeks. There's times I live in Florida where there's times where it says it's going to rain and it's completely sunny, or vice versa. Obviously, with colder places, it's likely going to be snowy and cold or whatever, but I don't know what factors in the weather they're considering. And then the stadium thing. Yeah. I mean, that's not fair where it's like, okay, the stadium size, like, well, no, you can't control that at least quickly. It takes years to build onto a stadium. So those factors to me just seem really dumb, especially the hotel one, because that's purely based on just the size of a city. So you can't really control that either.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. To me, I feel like I've been to Clemson, I've been to Auburn, I've been to a lot of these other places. Auburn probably is better situated as far as that's concerned with hotel spaces, but they have to be able to support that size of a game one way or the other, right? So I don't know how hotel availability comes into play. I could see it for the national championship game where you're going to have more people, but I'm not sure about the first round. So it's interesting, but I ultimately I think it's subjective and arbitrary. And I think that's what everybody, was trying to change with giving more access to the playoff. But we all know it's just a money grab. So you saw the Big Ten and SEC try to justify them getting more playoff spots when it comes to, and that's going to happen. And ESPN's going to have a say in that because they own the entire thing. That's why I said when the playoff came to fruition, we would have been better off if it was shared with Fox, but it ultimately stayed a completely wholly owned ESPN entity. And I think that's ESPN's going to make more money with more SEC schools, unfortunately, I think. And so it's up to the Big 12 now until the next contract to show, hey, we can bring the viewership. We bring the fans. We bring the quality of football. We aren't TCU in the championship game or in the playoff game, losing 62 to whatever they lost to. I think that's going to be the deciding factor for all of this. So the Big 12 has to step up. Yes, we added more people, but we also have to step up from a performance perspective.
Absolutely.
All right. And I think that'll take us to the end of the show. We covered a lot. We're 2 hours long. Last week.
You got my fun fact of the day here.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Okay. I'm sorry. Let's back up a second here. Let's go with Alan's oxymoronic stat of the week. Unfortunately, we don't have a fact versus stat rivalry this week. It's kind of been heating up lately if you've been following the show. But go ahead and hit us with that oxymoronic stat of the week, Alan.
All right. In the name of UCF just securing its best ever offensive line recruit in school history, I want to take a look at all time our best ever rated recruits since 247, which is the one I use. I mean, I'm sure it's at least fairly similar to the other ones. Started, ranking recruits by, the number, not the 4-star, 5-star, but by their actual, 4 stars, for example, start at like a 5.8. So who were the highest rated recruits? And I want to look at how many of I went back to, or did the top 20, how many of them have come recently? You would think with all the recruiting that Gus Malzahn has done and all these record classes we keep having, that a good portion of them would have come recently. And that is somewhat true. 6 of the last 6 of the 10, highest ever rated recruits in UCF history since this stuff started getting measured have come from the last 3 classes. So 60% of the 10 highest rated recruits have come from either 2025, 2024, or 2023. And if you take it to the top 20, 10 of the 20 have come in the last 3 classes, which I was actually surprised it was only 10. I thought it would be a little bit higher. I was thinking it'd be maybe like 15 or even 16. So I was surprised to see that. The top 2 highest rated recruits in UCF history are John Walker, number 1, and Kendarius Reddick, who's in this class, is number 2. But out of the top 5, they're the only 2 that are in the top 5, at least as far as the past 3 classes. The other 3 actually came from classes that some being a long time ago, and the other 2 being within the last decade, about the last decade. So maybe I'll turn this also into a Josh thing. Can you, one of them I would say there's probably no chance you're going to get just because it's random. I never even heard of this guy. But the other 2 in the top 5, can you guess who they are?
Top rated?
Yeah, so it'd be basically 2 of the. So one of them I'm just going to say is a guy named DeMarcus Johnson. He was a JUCO. He's rated the number 5 prospect we've ever landed. Who are the other 2 in the top 5? So you have John Walker, Kendarius Reddick.
Let me ask this qualifying question then. Is it freshmen or is it quote unquote JUCOs and transfers?
No, okay. These are freshmen. Both were freshmen. We got them out of high school. I'll give you a clue because it is kind of hard to just think to every recruit we've ever gotten. But one was in the Frost era, and one was in the O'Leary era. The O'Leary era guy was a fairly prominent part of the 2013 Fiesta Bowl winning team. The Frost guy was someone that was not a big part at all and actually ended up transferring after a year.
Well, Rashad Causey, is that one of them?
Nope. He
was a 4-star. I remember.
Yeah, that's a good guess. But that is not him.
Okay.
I can go. Next clue could be like position if you'd like.
Well, I was thinking, the Frost era one, when you were talking about that, I was thinking a certain defensive tackle that we all know that went to the Cowboys.
No, not Tristan Hill.
Yeah. Frost era.
Tristan Hill was a big part of that team. I'm saying, so this guy in the Frost era was like literally made 0 impact and transferred after 1 year. And it's not in the NFL.
And he was a freshman.
Correct. You may recall he had a pretty big announcement video. You're talking about the space guy. He committed to Maryland. Yep.
Yeah, he committed to Maryland and then committed to us. For the life of me, I can't remember his name.
Cordarian Richardson.
Yeah, Cordarian Richardson. That's right.
Now, the other one, like I said, big part of the
committed from space. That's why I remember him.
Yes, that was why I had to give that clue. The other one is came from Miami, like the city of Miami, not the University of Miami, and was someone that he had a quote with a. I don't want to give this away too much, but he had a quote with that he was part of the same. He went to the same high school as another really big part of that class, where they both said that they wanted to. They could have committed to Florida State, Miami, but they wanted to be part of building something at UCF. So they both came from Miami, were very highly rated. Obviously, this one that I'm talking about was obviously a little bit higher rated. He didn't end up making as much impact as the other guy that came with him in that class, but he was
4-star receiver.
Yes.
4-star receiver. He huge blocks.
Yes.
In that game. Oh
Came
my
in
gosh.
the class with Jeff Godfrey, but
yes, I remember Jeff. I was going to say Jeff, but then when you said not as big of an impact, oh my gosh, and he was in. It wasn't Rennell Hall.
No, not Rennell Hall, but you're in the right era. You're in the right era.
Yeah, I know who it is. I just can't think of his name right now because he also made it to the NFL for a little bit.
Yeah, I think he did.
Oh gosh, he was a 4-star. Oh gosh, why can't I remember his name? I think it's because we're recording at 11:30 at night, and we've been going for 2 hours. It wasn't Speedy. It was gosh, not. All right, you're just gonna. We're taking too long. We got too much dead air. I'd get to it.
Okay, Josh Reese.
Josh Reese, that's who it was. Yes, but
So-
I was thinking of the right guy. I just couldn't remember his name. So
No, you were close. So those make up the top 5 ever commits, but it is cool to see that 6 of the highest 10 have come in the Malzahn era, and 10 of the highest 20 have also come in the Malzahn era. So
why don't you just list? Why don't you list the top 20?
You want me to just list them really quick? Okay.
Yeah, just list them really quick.
All right. Let me bring this up. I can get it here. Give me 10 seconds. Okay. So we have, like I said, number 1, John Walker. Number 2, Kendarius Reddick. Number 3 is a guy named DeMarcus Johnson. He was a defensive tackle that was a JUCO transfer in 2002. Interesting enough. Then you have Cordarian Richardson. Then you have Josh Reese. Then you have Jalen Hayward, who was part of the 24 class.
Yep.
Andrew Harris, who is part of the 23 class. Isaiah Nixon, who is part of the 23 class. Chaston Brown, who we just literally landed last week. Toby Jackson, who I do remember, he was a defensive end in the 2008 class. I don't think he made much of an impact, if I recall, but I do remember the name. Then you have Kylan Fox, 2024 tight end. You have Tavion Swint, who's part of this current 2025 class. Tristan Payton, who probably a lot of people remember. He was at the time probably one of the most name-worthy kind of guys in the O'Leary era, someone that had committed to Florida, and we were able to flip him. At the time, it was a huge get. Was a guy that had pretty much an offer from every big school, 4-star guy. Didn't make a big impact at UCF, actually left the team for a little, came back, had some okay moments, but never really panned out. Then next is Titus, the guy from
Titus
Hawaii.
Davis.
No. Titus Mokir.
Titus Makamala. Yeah, that guy.
Yes, that guy who stayed for a year. He was actually a Heupel recruit, and when Heupel left, ended up staying under, in Malzahn's first year. Actually caught a touchdown in that Boise State game, very first game of the season. Then really didn't do much and transferred to UCLA. And from what I'm seeing, hasn't done a ton.
Well, he followed at that time Dylan Gabriel, right? Because Dylan Gabriel went to UCLA and then ended up transferring to Oklahoma again. Like he didn't stick. Like he went to UCLA, was there for like weeks, and then went to Oklahoma.
Correct. So that was number 14. Number 15 is a guy I also never heard of name Chad Masco, was a 2002 JUCO linebacker. Yeah. Yep. Then 15, you have Torian Wilson, who we all know very well. Obviously, went to the NFL, played for the Lions, part of the 2010 class. 16 is a Roy Williams, another JUCO guy from 2002. So I guess someone was balling out in 2002 when it comes to recruiting. 17 is Waden Charles, who we just landed as part of this class. 18, Burdell Richardson, obviously wide receiver as part of the last class. 19 is Kyle Gibson, who we probably obviously all remember, 4-star out of Armwood. And then number 20, believe it or not, I was surprised this was Kamar Aiken, who had a great UCF career actually, and then actually turned that into a 7-8 year NFL career. So
correct, he was good there too.
Yeah, so that makes up the top 10, and then as you go down even into the 20s, you have a couple more Gus guys: Nakai Martinez, Walt Claire Flynn Jr., Kay Birdsong, Jacob Good, Quan Lee, Stacey Gage, Braden Marshall, Raheem Stroud, Jakari Henderson. So a lot of the kind of 20 through 40 is all made up of Gus guys. And then a couple other, old school names that you probably remember, like a Josh Robinson, who had an excellent NFL career. He's in the top 25 there. Dredrick Snelson, Kavan Ahmad, a couple of these guys, but a lot of Gus guys.
Yeah, interesting stuff, because I think that kind of puts it in perspective on where a lot of these new guys rank relative to some big names in UCF football history, right? So, very, very interesting stuff. I'm still mad that Dante Culpepper was star rating era, because I think he would probably be number one, to be frank. I think he would have been above John Walker at the time. So yeah, Mike Krzyzek was a very, very good recruiter back then. So Robert McFarland was the offensive coordinator, but Mike Krzyzek did a lot of recruiting. He was also one of the originators and founders, for that quick no huddle offense, and was a very, very popular guy and very successful guy back then. So, all right, with all of that being said, that does take us to the end of the show. Thank you for those of you that have stayed with us. I love the fact that when I'm looking at the analytics, more and more of you are staying throughout the entire show. I think we had a lot of good information, a lot of good conversation, and there's going to be more coming down the pipeline as we march towards the season. So, Alan, thank you for being here. Nobrah, thank you for being here. The rest of the guys, we'll see Trey Neal probably tomorrow night in the College Huddle podcast that we'll be participating in. So hopefully, like I said, there's a Florida Gator host on there. So I would imagine there's probably going to be some sparks flying. So check that out. Make sure you're giving us feedback. Thank you for following. Continue to follow, like, subscribe. We appreciate you. Go Knights and
charge on.
Charge on, baby. Okay, I guess this is the part of the show where Josh talks fast.